Hi there, I'm Tony Lee, and this is Hot Flasher, your daily menopause podcast that serves up fresh news, research, and wellness tips. I've built a daily news pipeline to find the latest on women's health and menopause research. Allow me to introduce my co-host Nykki, who handles the headlines. Take it away, Nykki.
Thanks, Tony. We've got a good one today. 3 papers, all published in the last few weeks, and they cover some very different ground. The first one is a broad look at how common various menopause symptoms actually are. The second is the one from The Hook, a new paper making the case that burning mouth syndrome might be connected to brain changes during menopause. And it's more interesting than that summary makes it sound. And the third is a study on a compound from seaweed that showed promise for bone loss in mice. We'll get to why that last part matters. Let's start with the prevalence study because it sets up useful context for everything else. Pordell and colleagues published this in August 2026. The study looked at how many women experience different menopause symptoms and which factors seem to make them more or less likely. This kind of research, called an epidemiological study, doesn't test a treatment. It maps the landscape. How many women? Which symptoms? Any patterns in who gets hit hardest? The findings aren't shocking if you've been paying attention, but having the numbers confirmed in a 2026 paper is useful. Hot flashes and night sweats are the most commonly reported symptoms. Fine, we knew that. What I find genuinely worth sitting with is how high the rates are for the symptoms that get less airtime: sleep disruption, joint pain, mood changes, brain fog, urinary problems. These aren't rare outliers. They're part of the same picture for a very large share of women going through this transition. The associated factors piece, meaning what seems to predict who has worse symptoms, includes things like BMI, smoking, education level, physical activity, and whether a woman has other health conditions. That's a pretty standard list for this kind of research. Higher activity levels and not smoking are associated with fewer or milder symptoms. That tracks with what other studies have shown. It's observational, so we can't say exercise causes fewer hot flashes, but the signal is consistent enough across enough research that it's worth taking seriously. My honest read on this study: it's solid background data. It's not going to change what any individual woman does tomorrow, but it chips away at the idea that menopause is primarily a hot flash problem. The symptom burden is broad, it's real, and it affects quality of life across a lot of dimensions. Research that documents that clearly is doing useful work, even if it's not generating headlines. The burning mouth paper is where I want to spend some real time, because this one is more conceptually interesting and more nuanced than a quick summary can capture. Santos Silva and colleagues published this on August 24th. The title calls it a hypothesis-generating perspective, which is the researchers being upfront with you. This is not a clinical trial. This is not a findings paper. This is a group of scientists saying, we think there's a connection here that nobody has properly investigated. And here's why we think that. The connection they're proposing is between burning mouth syndrome and neurodegeneration during menopause. Burning mouth syndrome is exactly what it sounds like. A persistent burning, scalding or tingling sensation in the mouth, usually the tongue, lips or palate, that has no clear dental or structural cause. Dentists can't find anything wrong. It's not an infection, it's not a nutritional deficiency, though those get ruled out. It tends to be chronic, it's worse later in the day, and it disproportionately affects post-menopausal women. Somewhere between 10 and 40% of people with burning mouth syndrome are post-menopausal women, depending on which studies you look at. What this paper is proposing is that the same estrogen loss that triggers menopause might also affect the nerves and brain pathways in ways that contribute to this symptom. Estrogen has protective effects on nerve tissue. It helps maintain the myelin sheath, which is the insulating layer around nerve fibers, and it influences how the brain processes pain signals. When estrogen drops, some of those protective effects go with it. The hypothesis is that burning mouth syndrome, at least in postmenopausal women, may be one visible sign of those changes, and that it might share some biological mechanisms with early neurodegenerative processes. I want to be careful here, because this is the part where research hypotheses can go sideways in the press. This paper is not saying that burning mouth syndrome causes dementia. It is not saying that if your mouth burns, you're heading toward Alzheimer's. That's not what's being claimed. What it's saying is that the underlying biology might overlap, and that investigating that overlap could lead to better understanding of both conditions. That's a meaningful scientific hypothesis. And for women who have been told their burning mouth symptoms are psychosomatic, or who've been handed a mouthwash and sent home, having a serious neurological framework for this symptom is significant. It shifts the conversation. The practical takeaway right now, while this research matures, is this. If you have persistent burning in your mouth that your dentist can't explain, it's worth asking for a referral to an oral medicine specialist. That's the specialty that sits at the intersection of dentistry and medicine, and actually has diagnostic criteria and management strategies for burning mouth syndrome. You don't have to wait for the neuroscience to be settled to get that referral today. The other thing worth noting, the paper connects burning mouth syndrome specifically to the post-menopausal window, not perimenopause. The severity of estrogen loss seems to matter. That's another reason to take it seriously as a menopause-specific symptom, not just a random thing that happens to older women. Now, the seaweed paper. AI and colleagues looked at fucoidan, a compound found in giant kelp, and whether it could help with postmenopausal bone loss. Published online with a listed date of October 2020. So it is 6, though it appeared in the database this week, which happens sometimes with a head of print publications. The mechanism they were studying involves something called the OPG rank signaling axis. That phrase is a mouthful, so here's the plain version. Your body is constantly breaking down old bone and building new bone. There's a signaling system that controls that balance. When estrogen drops after menopause, the balance tips toward breakdown. More bone is removed than replaced, which is how you get thinning bones over time. The OPG rank system is a key part of that regulation. Fucoidan, in this study, appeared to shift that signaling in a direction that slowed bone breakdown. The study also found that fucoidan seemed to work through something called the betaine pathway, which is involved in how the body processes certain nutrients. That's interesting from a mechanism standpoint. It suggests fucoidan might be doing something more than just directly blocking bone breakdown. Here's where I have to be straight with you. This was a mouse study. Post-menopausal mice, to be specific, which is a standard model for this kind of bone research, because you can remove the ovaries to mimic estrogen loss. The results were promising in that model, but mouse bone biology and human bone biology are similar enough to be useful for early research, and different enough that plenty of compounds that work in mice never pan out in humans. There is no human trial of fucoidan for bone loss that I can point you to with confidence right now, which means if you go looking for fucoidan supplements, and you will find them, they exist, you'd be buying based on mouse data and the kind of mechanism level reasoning that sounds compelling until it doesn't replicate. The supplement market does not wait for human trials. That's a feature of the market, not the science. For bone health, right now, the evidence base for humans is in a different place. Weight-bearing exercise and resistance training have solid human data behind them. Calcium and vitamin D, in combination, have solid human data. HRT has solid human data for slowing bone loss in postmenopausal women. Those aren't exciting new headlines, but they're what's actually been tested in people. Fukuoka Dan is worth watching. If this group or others run a human trial and it holds up, that's genuinely interesting. Right now, it's a promising early finding that doesn't translate into action yet.
Thanks for listening to Hot Flasher. We're back tomorrow with more, so don't forget to subscribe. See you tomorrow.